Whoa. Welcome back. It's the end of another month, so of course we're here with our monthly reading wrap-up. Here are the books that I read this month. I read 14, and I am very proud to say that I read every book on my TBR this month. I read every book that I put on my monthly TBR this month. I did, yes me, I did. I read all of them, every single one. There were only 6, but I did read them all. I did. The last time I did that I think was like probably a year ago, so I'm pretty excited about it. Apart from that, I'll put my little genre breakdown on the screen. But anyway, let's just jump straight into it, shall we? The first book I picked up this month was Wild Love by Elsie Silver. I read this in a reading vlog. I'll also link all of the reading vlogs down below with the books that I read in each one if you want to get some more in-depth thoughts, because if I talked about them in a reading vlog, I probably won't talk about them for a super long time in this video. I'll still give all my thoughts obviously, but I just don't want to repeat myself because you guys have heard me talk about them before. I was really excited going into this because I love the Chestnut Spring series. In saying that, some of the books in that series are like 4.5, 5-star reads, and some of them are like 3 stars. So the series as a whole I love, but individually I definitely like some books more than others. And so going into this, I think I was just like, oh my gosh, I love Chestnut Springs, I'm gonna love this. And this one didn't quite hit for me, or at least didn't live up to the expectation that I had. And that is probably partly my fault for just going in with a really high expectation. But I also think that there will be books in this series that I probably will like more than this one, because that's just how Elsie Silver seems to be for me, and that's okay. I also will say, I totally get why people love this one. It just didn't hit for me. I just don't think I connected to the characters a whole lot. I liked them. I didn't have a problem with them. I just wasn't obsessed with them, and if you don't love the characters in a romance book, it can be pretty hard to love the book, because a lot of the time there's not like a huge plot going on in a romance book. So if you don't connect to the characters and then there's not a huge plot, like there's not a whole lot for you to like, you know what I mean? I really liked the setting of this book. I love a small town romance. I loved the side characters in this book. I'm excited to see the other stories that come from this series and from this small town. I ended up giving this book a 3.5, so like it was good, just wasn't like my absolute favorite, but I enjoyed it and I would recommend it. I also read The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. This is Holly Jackson's newest book. She is also the author of 5 Survive and A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and I have really enjoyed all of her books so far. They have all been around 4 stars for me, and this was no different. I also gave it, I think, 4 stars. In this book, we are following 18-year-old Belle, and her mum went missing, I think, when she was like 2 years old. No one knows what happens. No one knows if she's dead, if she's alive, if she ran away, if she was taken. Like, no one knows what happened to her. And now Belle is 18, and her family have decided, or like agreed, to do this documentary about Rachel Price and about the disappearance of Belle's mum, Rachel. Mostly because they need the money. They don't really want, like, they're okay with doing it, but they're not like obsessed with the idea of it. They are really just doing it because they need the money that this documentary will give them. And so they're doing this documentary, and Rachel Price reappears, as the title would suggest. It is really interesting. It was definitely one of those books for me where when I wasn't reading it, I was thinking about it and I was like, what is the answer to this? Like, what is the, not solution, but I just wanted answers. It was really like boggling to me how this had all happened. And I think honestly for a lot of this book, I was like, this could be a 5-star for me. But when we did get the answers to this whole mystery, I was a little bit disappointed. I don't really know why, but I think I was just expecting there to be maybe like more, or like maybe something really crazy. And for some reason, I don't know why, but like the answer just wasn't super satisfying to me, which even looking back, I'm like, I don't really know why, because it was interesting and it was crazy. But for some reason, when I got the answer, I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And I also think this book was just too long. This is a YA thriller mystery, I don't really know. And it is over 400 pages and the font is kind of small. And I just think for a thriller or a mystery, stick in the 300-page realm. I just don't think they need to be longer. That's my personal opinion. I just lost a bit of stamina, I guess, with this book, and I think if it had been shorter, I actually would have liked it more. And obviously in these books, you're kind of like, oh, I think it could be this. Oh, maybe it's not. Oh, I think it could be this. No, it's not. Oh, I think it could be this. And I just think I had too many of those. Like, I think we could have cut some of those like suspicions out and we still would have gotten to the same result. But overall, really, really enjoyed it and definitely recommend. I also read read The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black. This is the second part of the Stolen Heir duology. This duology is a little spin-off from the Cruel Prince, or like Folk of the Air trilogy. And in this series, we are following Jude's little brother Oak and Ren. And there's a lot of political elements to it, and there's a bit of romance, a lot of adventure. But overall, this was just fine to me. It wasn't anything crazy. It was good, and I enjoyed my reading experience. I think I'd give it like a 3.5. I think I liked this one a little bit better than I liked the first one in the series, just because like we knew the characters a little bit better. It's also interesting because the first book you follow Ren's POV and the second book you follow Oak's POV, so that was interesting. But overall, I was just like, yeah, like that was good, but I've already forgotten a lot about this book. Like it just hasn't stuck with me, and that's okay. It was a fun time. I just think the original Folk of the Air trilogy is a lot stronger to me personally. This is probably one of my favorite books that I picked up this month. This is A Tempest of Tea, and this is so much fun. In this book, we are following Arthi. I hope that's how you say her name. I actually don't know. Arthi is our main character, and she and her brother own a tea house, but that tea house turns into a blood house? Yeah, a blood house at nighttime for vampires. And something happens and they are at risk of losing their tea house, and then someone kind of comes up to them and is like, I will help you like save this tea house if you join my alliance and help me do this specific mission. So now Arthi and her brother are kind of roped into this mission, I guess, with this new alliance, which is a very unlikely alliance, and they also end up getting the help of 2 other characters. So we have 5 people total. They're all like pretty young, and they have all banded together to complete this mission, and they all have skills in different areas and different kind of like connections, that sort of stuff. But it is just really fun. It definitely reminded me of Six of Crows in some aspects. I don't want to compare it too closely because it's still very different vibes, but the idea of like 5 teenagers slash young adults coming together to complete a mission, it definitely has that same vibe to it. And I thought this was just structured really well. It's like 330 pages, I want to say, and so much happens in this book. It had me interested the whole time. I was so intrigued to know what was going to happen, and I just really enjoyed it. I think I gave it like 4.25 maybe. It was just so much fun. This is part of a series. I don't know if it's like a duology or like a full-blown series, but this one only came out this year, so the next book is not out, and it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger, so be warned. This also doesn't have great reviews on Goodreads, which was really interesting because I remember looking it up on Goodreads after I read it, and I was like, oh, it's like 3.6 stars or something as the average rating on Goodreads, which is not great, but I was shocked because I really loved it. So I don't know if it's one of those books where most people don't love it. Like I haven't really heard that many people talk about it, but I personally really loved it, really recommend it. Next book I'm going to talk about is Say You Swear. If you watch my reading vlog where I read this one, you already know that this wasn't a favorite of mine. I thought it was a little bit silly, but that's okay. It's one of those books where it's like, I can see why this hits for people, and I think if I was in like the perfect mood for this type of silly Wattpad-y kind of read, then maybe I would have loved it, but I just found it a little bit ridiculous, a little bit trauma dumpy. If you love this, I love that for you. It just wasn't my cup of tea, and that's okay. We all have different opinions on books. This was a 2-star read for me, but I'm also glad I read it. It was a very interesting read. I also picked up Saving 6 this month, and this was so freaking good. I don't know what Chloe Walsh is putting in these books, but they just hit, and I really can't explain it because like what is even happening in these books? Like it's just mess. It's just messy, it's sad, it's emotional, but they just get me every time. I read Binding and Keeping 13 towards the end of last year, and I don't know why it took me so long to pick up the next book in the series. Oh, actually I do know why, because it was because I found out that these books, Saving and Redeeming 6, follow Joey and his love interest, and I also got told that it like kind of goes over the same timeline as Binding and Keeping 13, and I was really worried that they were going to be a little bit repetitive and we were just going to kind of see the same scenes that we saw in Binding and Keeping 13 but maybe from another POV. And I will say, at least Saving 6, it did not feel repetitive to me really at all. Like there were definitely some scenes that we had seen before in Johnny and Shannon's books, but it wasn't like my main thought. Like there were a few scenes where I was like, oh, we've seen this before. I remember reading this from Shannon's POV. But it wasn't like an annoying, repetitive way. It was more like, oh, it's so interesting to know what was happening in Joey's life during that scene and what he was thinking and what he was going through, because it really gives a lot of perspective to a lot of the scenes that we already read about and we already knew what was happening. So I actually enjoyed that a lot more than I thought. In saying that, I don't know if it's going to be different in Redeeming 6. I don't know if I'm going to feel like it's repetitive. I also had such a gap in between reading Binding and Keeping 13, and I think that was like a good thing because I wasn't immediately going into this and being like, oh my gosh, I just read this scene. Like, it's been months. So it didn't feel repetitive to me. So if that's something you're concerned about, I wouldn't worry about it personally. And I really like our characters in this book. I thought this book was really good. I rated it 4 stars because these books also still include some things that I just like don't love. Like, they can be quite like crude and they can be a bit lusty, but they have this really deep emotional level to them and you get so connected to these characters. They feel so real. It really reminds me of the Addicted / Calloway sister series. If you've read that series and loved it, I really recommend picking up this series. It's definitely different, but it has the same feeling to it of that like found family and like messy characters that find peace within their relationships and their friendships. So I read that. I have started Redeeming 6 and I am really enjoying it so far. I'm almost halfway through, but obviously haven't finished it. So obviously it's not in this video, but really enjoyed this one. Another book that I picked up this month, which was a really pleasant surprise, is House of Salt and Sorrow by Erin A. Craig. This is part of a series. This is the first book. I think it's eventually going to be a trilogy, but the third book's not out yet. Forgive me if I'm wrong. I've just got the second book, but I haven't read it yet. But this is a gothic fantasy and it is like a reimagining / retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses. And I remember when I read the back of this in a bookstore months ago, I was like, this sounds fascinating to me. And it really was fascinating. I really enjoyed this book, but it was just not what I was expecting in like a good way. It is so atmospheric, very eerie, a little bit creepy, but so intriguing. It feels a little bit like a fever dream, but in a good way. It's very much like what is real, what is not. It was really, really interesting. The premise of this book is we're following one of the 12 sisters and she has already lost a few of her sisters. A few of her sisters have died all in different ways and her family kind of feels like they're cursed. They're like, why do our daughters keep passing away? This is so bizarre. We can't figure out why this is happening. And we are following Annalie as she is one of the sisters and she is kind of trying to figure out why this is happening, but also starts to go on these adventures at night to these balls and like these dances, and it's very, very interesting. I think it's one of those books that it's more fun if you go in pretty blind, but I'm really excited to pick up the next book in the series because this one it was just so good. I think I also gave this one 4 stars. My battery's gonna die. BRB. Another book I read this month was The Crimson Moth. This is my book club's pick of the month. We haven't actually discussed it yet, so I don't know what they thought about it yet, but I really enjoyed this. This is going to be a duology. The second book is not out yet. This is like a newish release. It's also called The Crimson Moth in Australia, but it's called The Heartless Hunter in the US, I think. So if you're looking for this book, you might have to look up The Heartless Hunter. I don't know why they have different names. It is what it is. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it like 4.25 stars. It's YA fantasy, but it's like a bit of a Regency or Victorian. I actually don't know what like the time, like the era is, but it kind of gives that like Bridgerton kind of vibe to it, which I loved. I love a Regency setting. I love a Victorian age setting. I love the atmosphere that it gives. I love the way they talk, kind of like not like old English, but a little bit. Very like proper. I don't know. I'm a sucker for it. So if you like that kind of setting, this book is definitely for you. But we are following Rune and she is a witch, and witches are just like not allowed to live in this society. They want to get rid of all the witches, so there are like witch killers, witch hunters out there. And Rune is obviously pretending not to be a witch so that she doesn't get killed. And so she kind of like spends her days as a bit of a socialite. She goes to all the balls and all the parties and meets all the people and does all the things, and then at night she is a witch hunter. Like she goes after the witch hunters and kills or tries to kill all of the witch hunters to obviously help all of the witches to survive. But then there may or may not be a romance between Rune the witch and one of the witch hunters. forbidden, enemies to lovers, tension. Yes, please. It was so much fun. If you like enemies to lovers, if you like the tension, if you like the forbidden kind of romance, like they're literally basically trying to kill each other. I ate it up every time. Like this is real enemies to lovers and it is so good. Then I picked up Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I have heard so much about this. I think every single time I mention that I want to read any sci-fi ever, people are like, oh my gosh, if you like sci-fi, you have to read Project Hail Mary. So I finally read it this month. Actually, I listened to it because a lot of people said to listen to the audiobook and it was so good. I also think I gave this one 4 stars. There are a lot of 4 stars this month, which is pretty good. It was just so much fun. It was so interesting. I've never read anything like it. In this book, we are following an astronaut that gets sent into space. There's a lot of science talk in this book, which I didn't fully grasp. Like, I don't think I fully comprehended all of this science talk, so don't quiz me on that because I don't remember. But there's something bad happening to Earth, and so they have to send the astronauts up to space to fix it. That's the very basics of it all. And Ryland, our main character, is one of the astronauts that gets sent away, and to be able to get them into space, like they're gonna be in this rocket ship space thing for years before they get to their destinations. So the astronauts get put in a medical induced coma and they will only wake up a little bit before they get to their destination. There's a lot of reasons why they do that, and that's explained in the book, but not necessary for me to explain. And so we are following Ryland and we're in his head and we are with him when he wakes up from this coma, and he has no memory. He doesn't remember who he is, what he's doing, how he got there, and he's just like, what the heck is going on? He doesn't even remember like his own name. That's pretty cool. Like, that's pretty fun. So basically this book is like following Ryland along his mission, but he is getting like flashbacks every now and then of his previous, not his previous life, but his past as he remembers it slowly. He gets like pieces of his memory back, I guess. And you get to see like how he ended up where he is and how he got into this position and the mission that follows. And obviously I don't want to ruin anything. All I will say is that I love Rocky, and it was such a beautiful storyline. I loved it. It was so fun. If you guys have any more sci-fi recommendations for me, please let me know because I think I love sci-fi. I've read Red Rising, like the original trilogy of that. I've read The Lunar Chronicles, Renegades. I think that's really it. I haven't read a lot of sci-fi, so give me your recommendations down below. I also read 28 Summers by Elin Hilderbrand. This is my first Elin Hilderbrand book. I'm so excited about this because I feel like I've been wanting to pick up this author's books for so long. Destiny actually sent me this one all the way from the US, so shout out Destiny. I love you so much. And it was really interesting because I started this book and I would say for the first like half of the book, I was interested, but I wasn't invested. I'm almost a little bit annoyed or frustrated at the situation because the premise of this book is that we are following Mallory and Jake. Jake is Mallory's brother's best friend, and Mallory lives on Nantucket in this cute little beachside cottage type thing, and her brother and her brother's best friend Jake come to visit one year for Jake's bachelor party. And so Mallory meets Jake there and they just hit it off. They have like immediate chemistry. They really get along. There's obviously a lot more explanation, but they end up meeting up every year on Labor Day weekend, spending the weekend together and then not seeing each other for the rest of the year for the next 28 years. So they spend like 28 Labor Day weekends together and then don't see each other for the rest of the year. They don't communicate for the rest of the year. They only see each other Labor Day weekend every year for 28 summers. And my issue with that is that during these 28 years, they both have other partners. Not the entire time, but there are other partners in this story. Girlfriends, boyfriends, marriages. And so they are essentially cheating on their partners to meet up every Labor Day weekend. And that, I just have an issue with that. Because a lot of this book, I was just like, you are so obviously in love with each other. Why are you not breaking up with your respective partners to be together? And they kind of gave reasons. They did. Like the author kind of was like, oh, they can't because of XYZ. But a lot of the time I was just like, that is not that good of a reason. I couldn't fully get on board. In saying that, during the second half, I don't know what changed for me, but I got so invested in these characters. It felt like I had spent so much time with these characters, and it felt like I knew Mallory and Jake so well, because whilst you see their little weekends together, Labor Day weekends, you also get to find out a lot about the rest of their lives and a lot about the other people in their lives. I feel like the characters are so well developed that I started to kind of be like, I kind of understand why they are doing what they're doing a little bit. I still don't think it's right and I don't agree with it, but Elin Hilderbrand made the characters feel so real. And the thing about real people is that a lot of the time they mess up, they have flaws, they're not perfect people, and they do bad things. And in this case, Mallory and Jake are not perfect people, and they do this Labor Day weekend situation. And again, I'm not saying it's right, but it's just a lot more layered than right and wrong. There's a lot of nuance to it, and it's a lot more complex. Again, do I think it's right? No, I don't, and I will never agree with it. But it was just really interesting to see how it all came together and to see these characters get older and how they gained perspective. It was really fascinating. I will say, I went into this thinking it was going to be more of a romance, but also like a bit of a women's fiction type thing, and I would say it's more of a women's fiction with romance. Like, I would say it's more just like fiction with a romance in it, because whilst the romance is obviously, or like the love story between our two characters is kind of the main plot point, it's a lot more than that, and you're mostly like following these two characters as they live their lives for 28 years, more so than just them falling in love. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. I really liked it. And I didn't expect to give it 4 stars when I first started it. Like, I was really thinking it would be lower of a rating, but it got me. It really got me, and by the end, I felt numb when I finished this book because it felt so real. I think because they were flawed and they just weren't these perfect people and they didn't have this perfect storyline, it made it feel so real. So when I finished it, I was like speechless. And I feel like that doesn't happen to me that often anymore. I feel like I used to kind of have that feeling with books a lot, where I was just like, wow, I can't believe like that was the story and whatever, and I can't believe that's ended. Like, most of the time now I finish a book, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so good, and then I start something else. But this book, I literally had to just like sit for a bit being like, wow, like these people's story is over now. Like, I'm done with this book. I'm leaving this world. It felt so consuming while I was reading it. I was really, really impressed, and I'm excited to read some other books by Elin Hilderbrand and see how I feel about the other ones that she's written. I also read Anatomy and Immortality this month. This is like a little duology. It's YA, historical fiction, bit of mystery. I don't know exactly what it's classified as. I would say it's like historical fiction with a mystery. These books were so good. I loved them so much. The first book I rated 4 stars. The second book I literally finished last night, I think. 4.5. It was so good. And I think this is my favorite book from the month. It was so much fun. Anyway, in the first book we meet Hazel, and she is an aspiring surgeon. However, this book is set in the Victorian era in Edinburgh. So you have to read this with like Scottish accents in mind, please, because it makes it a million times better. And because it's set in this time, women are just not able to get higher education. They're not allowed to study at college. A woman surgeon is just like unheard of and totally unacceptable. So she dresses up as a boy and goes to class. Slay. Absolute girl boss. However, something happens where she is not able to study anymore. So she takes matters into her own hands, and she ends up meeting this guy called Jack, who is a resurrection man, which basically means that he digs up dead bodies and sells them, which is illegal, but it's a bit of like an underground sort of situation, and he is just like working to survive. Like, he is just doing anything he can to earn enough money to get by, and this is the kind of situation he's found himself in. And so they meet, and she is like, oh my gosh, I would love to buy some bodies from you, actually, because I need to study them, do some autopsies, learn the human anatomy, and what better way to learn the human anatomy to become a surgeon than to get some hands-on experience with some dead bodies. It sounds a lot more gross than it actually is. I didn't personally find it yucky or like icky. There are a few kind of descriptions, but it's more like anatomical or like medical than like yuck. You know what I mean? Like, they're talking about organs in a medical kind of way, I would say. And there's a romance, but it is so much more than that. It's really interesting the way the storyline kind of develops and unfolds, and I just think it's so worth the read. And then the second book was just so good. I think because you already just like know the characters so well, and I loved the way that this storyline unfolded and how it differed from the first book. You get a whole new setting, a whole new cast of side characters, a secret society. It's so much fun. I have become a sucker for historical fantasies, historical romances, historical mysteries, whatever they are. I don't know why, but I love it. I love the vibes. I love the descriptions of the balls and the outfits, the dresses, even like the servants having their own storylines and the French. It's just, I love it. So if you guys have anything similar to this, please let me know. You guys recommended these because I read the Stalking Jack the Ripper series, which is also kind of like a similar vibe. But if you guys have any other recommendations that are similar to these, please let me know. I also did one reread this month, and that was Empire of Storms by Sarah J Maas. This is the 6th book in the Throne of Glass series. I actually started my Throne of Glass reread last year, and I got up to Empire of Storms. So I finished Queen of Shadows, and then I decided to start my Crescent City reread so that I could read the first and second Crescent City before the third one came out earlier this year. And then after I did that, I just like never went back to my Throne of Glass reread. And then this month I was like, I kind of feel like going back to that. So I listened to Empire of Storms as an audiobook. I decided not to do the tandem read for my reread because I just didn't think it was necessary. I feel like it makes a lot of sense the first time you read it, and I really recommend it if you're reading this series for the first time. And I did that the first time and I loved it, but for the second time I just didn't feel like I needed to. So I read this one, loved it, so good, 5 stars, and I'm excited to continue my reread. I only have Tower of Dawn and Kingdom of Ash, and that is going to be painful, so pray for me. And the last book that I have to talk about that I read this month is Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. I think this is my first John Mark Comer book. This is Christian non-fiction. Liam and I do like a little mini book club where we read like Christian non-fiction books together, and this was phenomenal. This is also the author of The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I haven't read that. I do want to, and I've listened to some of John Mark Comer's podcasts before, but yeah, I've never read any of his books, and this was incredible. This is his newest release. I think it came out earlier this year, or late last year, I forget. But it was just so good. It is just like, I don't know, I just would recommend it to anyone who loves Jesus, anyone who wants to be a better follower of Jesus, who wants to improve their relationship with Jesus. Like, this was just absolutely phenomenal. Very just like basic stuff, but good stuff. Great reminders. It was the perfect amount of encouraging but challenging, and I just really appreciated it. And Liam and I both loved it, and as soon as we finished it, we ordered another book by this author. So we're going to be reading Garden City next, and I'm really excited about it. So I definitely recommend this one if you guys are looking for any Christian nonfiction. But those are all of the books that I read this month. I had such a fun reading month. I feel like I read so many fun books, and a lot of different types of books as well, a lot of different genres. I would love to know what your favorite book you read this month was. I think mine was either Immortality or A Tempest of Tea. Those were my 2 favorites. But I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.